You are listening to Season 2 of The Diary of a Wannabe Writer, the short and often daily podcast in which I chronicle my life and attempt to be a writer by writing daily. Sometimes. Hello, welcome to the podcast. Today is Sunday the 27th of July. That's not how I normally start the show. I've confused myself by starting differently, but I've really struggled to get motivated to write today. I was hoping to do a bit of work on the prologue and maybe chapter 1 of Self-Portrait, but I didn't. So instead, I'm going to talk about Star Trek. I'm sorry, I needed something that would fill the 6 minutes easily. Now, to most people, Star Trek is a TV series that ran for 3 years in the 1960s. It got cancelled twice. Basically, after the second series, it was cancelled, but a fan letter writing campaign got them to do a third. And then the second time it got cancelled at the end of the third series, that was it. So they made 78 episodes, which isn't all that many. However, in the late 70s, Paramount decided they wanted to start their own television network. So they decided that as Star Trek basically became very, very popular through reruns. And they decided it was time to make a new Star Trek television series called Star Trek Phase 2. The plan was that it was going to reunite all of the original cast. However, Leonard Nimoy, who played Spock, didn't want to be committed to another TV series. So Spock wasn't going to be in it. So they created a new Vulcan character to replace him. They got as far as writing scripts and building sets. And then the network, the TV network that it was supposed to be, the big launch thing for, never happened. So the show never happened. Because they'd spent all the money developing scripts and building sets, the decision was to make a movie instead. And so Star Trek The Motion Picture was born. Now, Leonard Nimoy had no problem with committing to making a movie. He just didn't want to be tied down to a weekly TV show. So Spock suddenly was in it again. The movie was a moderate success. I happen to think it's visually stunning. It's probably the most adult Star Trek movie offered. I don't mean because it's got sex and violence and swearing in it. It hasn't. But it's a very, very grown-up storyline. And I think history will judge it as a better film than it was maybe initially received as. They carried on making films every couple of years, and then in 1987 the decision was made to do another television series. Now, Star Trek The Next Generation was born then. Now, there were a lot of ideas from Star Trek Phase 2. So, for example, the first officer was originally going to be called William Decker. That was a character that did appear in the movie. He was renamed William Riker for the TV series. One of the characters on the ship was meant to be an ex-girlfriend of his. In the movie, it was Lieutenant Ilea. But in Star Trek The Next Generation, it was Lieutenant Deanna Troi. There were other similarities. So there were quite a few of the scripts that were written for the series were adapted. I think the season 2 opener, which I think was called The Child, was an old Star Trek Phase 2 script they just adapted to the new series. Star Trek Next Generation was a bit wobbly at the beginning. The first couple of seasons weren't great, but when it found its feet, it was so good. And the 6th season was meant to be the last. They were meant to do 6 series of it. Meanwhile, they were still, at this point, also pretty much still producing classic Trek movies. So, you'd had, I think Star Trek's 5 and 6 came out. The movies came out whilst Next Generation was on the air. But yeah, they decided to finish with the sixth series. And a decision was made that they wanted to have a Star Trek series on because they felt there was, it was very popular. Next Generation was ending, but they felt there should be another TV show. So they commissioned Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And Star Trek Deep Space Nine started basically during the second half of the 6th season of The Next Generation. So the idea was they were meant to overlap by 6 months. However, in the end, The Next Generation was actually commissioned for a 7th and final season. So in fact, Deep Space Nine and The Next Generation overlapped by 7 years. Sorry, 7 years, by 2 years. Next Generation ran to 7 seasons. And because both shows had been on the air for 18 months and both did very, very well, the decision was made when The Next Generation ended that there was actually room on screens for two Trek shows. So instead of effectively Deep Space Nine replacing The Next Generation, Star Trek Voyager replaced The Next Generation. Now, Deep Space Nine was initially viewed as a bit dull. They were on a space station, so things had to come to them. But arguably, with the Dominion War and other storylines, it is actually the greatest Star Trek show there is. Meanwhile, Voyager it's effectively the Battlestar Galactica of Star Trek. It's basically people trying to get home. Those two shows, Deep Space Nine and Voyager, overlapped for 5 years. And when Deep Space Nine ended, the decision was there'd been 7 years of 2 Star Trek series running simultaneously. They were doing usually 52 episodes a year, which is quite a lot. So the decision was made to just go back down to one Star Trek show. When Voyager ended, Voyager did end. I think we're about 2000. Let me try and get the year right. Can't remember now, 94, about 2001. And so the show that replaced it was actually a prequel set before. So basically, the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine and Voyager were all set around about the same time. You did occasionally run into characters from one show in another show, and there were characters that, there was a Cardassian character called Gol, can't remember, but he appeared in all 3. This is going to overrun, sorry. So yeah, they replaced Voyager with a series called Enterprise, which starred Scott Bakula as Captain Jonathan Archer. It was a prequel. It was set before the classic series, and it wasn't great. It had some very good ideas, but it again took a long time to get going. And in fact, it got cancelled after its 4th season. They did all the other shows. Next Generation did 178 episodes, and Voyager and Deep Space Nine didn't do many less than that. And it was 160 something for both of those shows. Enterprise made 98, didn't quite do that 100. And there was no replacement show. Star Trek was effectively cancelled from the television. In the meantime, whilst those TV shows had been made, they had also made 4 Next Generation movies, the first one having both Captain Kirk and Picard in it. So at this point, there had been 10 cinema outings for Star Trek. Now, the next iteration of Star Trek was the J.J. Abrams movies. They are effectively set in a parallel universe. But in that parallel universe, Spock from the real Star Trek timeline ended up in the parallel universe and then stayed there. And what's quite cool is that an event from those movies, the destruction of the Romulan homeworld, then did make it into the next iteration of TV shows. Because I think it was about 2017, 2018, they started making Star Trek for streaming. The first one was Star Trek Discovery. It was a prequel to the classic Star Trek series, but set after Enterprise. So the Enterprise actually, as a spaceship, existed at that point, but Kirk wasn't the captain yet. The captain was a guy called Christopher Pike. And he did actually... We did run into the Enterprise and Captain Pike and Spock, because Spock served under Captain Pike, obviously played by a different actor, in Discovery. Now, Discovery has done a weird thing. It ran for 5 years. The first 2 years served as a prequel. But at the end of it, at the end of Series 2, they get blasted forward into the future, into the 32nd century. And the rest of the show is set hundreds of years after Next Generation, Deep Space Nine. So it started as an early show and then ended up as a show set way in the future. And it stayed there. They didn't come back. So Discovery is effectively set in the 32nd century for the last 3 years. Meanwhile, this show did very, very well. But what people really liked from it, in the second season, they meet the Enterprise and Captain Christopher Pike, who was Kirk's predecessor, and it did so well, they started making a series out of that. It's called Strange New Worlds. The current series is the 3rd series. It's streaming now. I think like the 3rd episode has gone out. It's great. It's the best of the new ones, to be honest. It's been guaranteed a 5th season, but then we stopped after that. They've also done a series called Star Trek Picard, which is effectively... It's not really a sequel to Star Trek The Next Generation, at least until its last season, but it does contain a lot of the Next Generation characters cameo in it, and obviously it's around Jean-Luc Picard. And they've also just announced a Star Trek Academy TV series, and it is set in the 32nd century immediately after Discovery ends. So it's the first, basically Starfleet are being decimated in the years between, Next Generation and that iteration of shows and the 32nd century, and it's being rebuilt as a result of the Discovery arriving. And so there's a new Starfleet Academy show, and the classmates are the first iteration of Starfleet Academy cadets for a very long time. That show has yet to air. There's two other shows that need to get an honourable mention here. So they did a cartoon series called Star Trek Lower Decks, which was funny but serious, and they did such a good job of it. The characters were so interesting. They actually did a crossover in Strange New Worlds, the series with Captain Pike set on the Enterprise, where they actually meet two of the characters from the cartoon series. And what they did was they actually got the actors who play them on the cartoon show to actually play them for real as real people on Strange New Worlds. But they open and close the episode with some animated scenes as well. It sounds shit. It's really, really good. And so there's Star Trek Prodigy as well, which is another cartoon series. It was made for Nickelodeon. It's only just finished. They only made 2 seasons of it. But it basically was about a group of kids who find a derelict starship. And there's a hologram on it that tells them what to do and how to work the ship because it thinks they're Starfleet cadets. And that is a hologram of Janeway, who is the captain from Star Trek Voyager. And then the second season of that, they actually get this ship, the USS Protostar, home and actually meet the real Captain Janeway. And it's quite good. So let's go through this. Oh, and I didn't mention they did between the classic Star Trek series and the first Star Trek motion picture, they did a cartoon series. I think they made about 26 episodes of Star Trek, the animated series. So, just in case you don't know, this is the history of Star Trek. You have Star Trek the animated series, Star Trek The Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Voyager, Star Trek Enterprise, Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Star Trek Starfleet Academy, Star Trek Lower Decks, and Star Trek Prodigy. On top of that, you have the movies Star Trek the Motion Picture, Star Trek 2 The Wrath of Khan, Star Trek 3 The Search for Spock, Star Trek 4 The Voyage Home, Star Trek 5 The Final Frontier, Star Trek 6 The Undiscovered Country, and then I can't remember the names of the Star Trek Generations, Star Trek... Oh, there's 3 more Next Generation movies, but I can't remember all their names. And then you've got the 3 J.J. Abrams on as well. That's a lot of Star Trek. And you know what? It's all right. It's the only franchise that I would say rivals Doctor Who in terms of sheer volume of stuff produced. In fact, it probably outpaces it by quite a large degree. Anyway, that was a massive overrun. I should have really split that into 2, but hopefully I'll do some writing tomorrow and I'll have some writing to talk about. Thank you for being bored to death by Spock. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to The Diary of a Wannabe Writer. For more information about what I'm writing, go to linktr.ee/Richard Writes, capital R, capital W, where you can find details of my website and social media. I may see you there.